We were 30 meters behind the front vehicle. All of a sudden, there is an explosion. It has hit the front vehicle. What is a fucking policeman doing with a rocket-propelled grenade? We're on night patrol. The local population generally don't know where we are. We're the phantoms of the night, and that works in our favor. I wake up. We're being shot at. Bullets are coming into the compound. Fuck, the Taliban has breached the compound. This is fucking it. We're on the edge of close quarter combat. Welcome to the podcast Afghan Files 3.0, Pandora's Box continued. I am Lex D Reilly, and today I am inviting you in to my third unpack in the series of the Afghan Files, my personal experience and some of my peers' experience from the Afghanistan war, specifically in 2010, which was my tour there. If you haven't listened to Afghan Files 1 and Afghan Files 2.0, I do believe that the sequence is of benefit, and they are earlier on in the playlist of my channel, inviting you in. I do want to stipulate that I am not able to take responsibility for anybody's psychological or emotional safety or duress which might be coming up as a result of listening to this podcast. And I will say that I'm setting an expectation that by listening to this, you are consenting to hear my recount of war, and that can sometimes be unsettling, graphic, and confronting, and that by doing that, you are confident in your ability to regulate your stress levels and to tend to your nervous system. I'm going to pre-frame this discussion by sharing that I have a sense that after this episode, I will take a break from the topic. I have a sense that there will be more to the Afghan Files. However, I'm just going to sit into 3.0, share what I share, and I feel ready to talk about something else after this podcast, a new topic. I'll share more about that at the end of the episode. I want to reflect on a very romantic Taliban proverb, and I'm doing my best to communicate accurately here. I think in some regards the proverb might be attributed to Afghan. I see it as a Taliban proverb, and the saying is, you have the watches, we have the time. And this is what the Taliban communicated to us. I believe it was having its relevance towards the end of the campaign, when there was an awareness that we would be leaving Afghanistan in its entirety and withdrawing from the conflict. That saying for me is very wise, very powerful, and very true. If I expand a bit more about what that actually means, so our forces, the International Security Assistance Force, the NATO, the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization, we are a conglomerate of the world's best soldiers with the world's best technology. Not all of the best soldiers, not all of the best technology, but an incredibly competitive force. And the Taliban were well aware of our technological and tactical advantage. We're so highly trained, and we had the best equipment. We had thermals. We had the ability to detect where they were communicating from on their radios. We had helicopters, missiles that can follow lasers. We just had so much technology and resources. However, the Taliban were patient and clever and tenacious. To say that I had the utmost respect for the Taliban would be a load of shit. And I'm definitely rough in my language when I use that, but I'm not into saying things just for the sake of it. And it would just be a fluffy romantic thing if I said that. I certainly respected their warrior spirit. I certainly respected their courage. They also did things that I don't respect. But regarding their ability to go onto the battlefield to fight such a well-equipped, well-trained enemy, which was us, I certainly respect their ability there, their courage, and how clever they were. I came up with a saying within myself when I was there, and that was that simplicity overcomes technology. And we had some of the greatest technology there to disrupt what they were doing. I won't talk about it too much because I'm not sure on the legal consequences of what technology should and shouldn't be communicated openly. And the arms race was a regular back and forth game of cat and mouse and adjusting to each other's tactics and technology. And the simplicity of having a piece of string that the Taliban would use to pull to detonate a bomb, that would overcome the technology that we had to jam radio frequencies. I remember this scenario maybe a couple of years before I went to Afghanistan, and the Taliban were literally wrapping themselves in heavy blankets and mattresses so the helicopters with the thermal vision weren't able to see them. And that's just so simple, but it's so clever. And I certainly respect that. We had the watches, they had the time. And it's, yeah, it's a really interesting reflection to sit in, to think about my contribution to that war and to think about the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the direction that it's gone in now, and the high likelihood that some of the interpreters that we worked with, maybe they were beheaded because they worked with us. Maybe their families were executed because they worked with us. I don't know, but I do know the plausible possibilities there, and I'm okay to let my mind explore that now, but different times in the past I was more sensitive to that and a feeling of remorse, and like I let some of the people down. There were unique circumstances there that I'll share. One of them was a thing called air red. And this is the relationship between nature and technology, or simplicity and technology. And so we preferred to go out on patrol when we had the support of air medical evacuation. I always felt way more confident that there was a possibility that if something occurred and someone in our team or myself was a casualty, that there was the option to be receiving evacuation by helicopter. Yes, there is a requirement to secure the ground and provide safety for the helicopter. I understand that. It's not always a given. However, it created confidence in our plan, and I felt a little bit more at ease when that was available. When dust storms would come in, the dust storms that we had there were very powerful weather events, and they impacted our technology. They impacted how far we could see. They impacted the lasers that we would use to measure distances. And they also impacted the helicopter's ability to fly. My understanding is that the dust, the fine sands are able to get into the mechanical parts of the helicopter and cause havoc and undermine the basic functions of a helicopter. Then in theory it won't fly or can just drop from the sky. And when there was air red, so these dust storms coming through, I'm assuming the Taliban were aware of that. And so I often had this uneasiness when this was the case. And if we were on patrol and it became air red, we would potentially stop where we were and just try to make things very secure, or shorten the period of patrol. And we were at these smaller forward operating bases when we were air red and the dust storms were coming in. It was also having some advantage to some of the weapons the Taliban used and their ability to escape our detection as well. So I personally had an eerie feeling when there were dust storms coming in. Oh, fuck. Out at this smaller base, the more Wild West base in our area of operations, Marshall, a couple of Taliban fighters had been captured, and due to the legal framework of the war, they weren't classed as prisoners of war. They were classed as a puck, and I think that stood for person under constraint, because we were also respecting the Afghani legal system. And when we captured Taliban, we would return them to the Afghan judicial process. When we captured guys, or we were searching guys that we thought were suspicious, we would gather their biometrics from memory. That was fingerprints and maybe eye scans, facial recognition, stuff like that. And from memory, so please forgive me with this, the consideration was that this goes to a database, and then if by chance these guys end up at an airport trying to get into Germany or US or Sweden, I don't know exactly, they would be detected with this base. Or if we captured them several times, we would be able to recall in detail that it was the same person, because we had the biometrics and they couldn't just change their name, because they didn't have things like driver's licenses or passports that they would just, as a normal citizen, would have access to. So we had a couple persons under constraint, a couple pucks in a holding pen, and I'm being tentative and cautious with the words that I use now, because it's probably a sensitive topic, and it's a topic where if I misuse a word, I don't feel confident with my trust in the Australian government or the Australian authority, and my sense is if I say something wrong, it will probably be used against me. You might be able to sense my hesitation, so I will explore this topic perhaps shallowly and more cautiously than what I would like to. So we had several persons under constraint, and they were in these holding pens, and they have different shaped bodies than me in some way. Like I've mentioned before, they were slimmer. The Afghani guys were slimmer, and they had way better hip mobility. So these guys were squatting. They were also restrained, and they had their vision and hearing restricted. When handling prisoners or person under constraint in the war environment, we are beholden to the Geneva Convention. So there's certain requirements for us to make sure that they have water or access to certain resources that we consider are human rights, and we respected that. These guys smelt like piss and shit. The reason they smelt like piss and shit was because some of them piss and shit themselves. From their context, they had maybe been trying to outmaneuver our Australian forces in some kind of attack. Maybe they were shooting at us, maybe they were trying to detonate a bomb, but somehow they'd been caught. When the Taliban would capture a coalition member, that person that is captured is held by the Taliban, who are not respecting the Geneva Convention. And at that period of time, there was content of coalition soldiers being executed and beheaded on the internet. And maybe that was in their psyche of how they would treat us if they captured us. So then from their perspective, they've just come out from some skirmish, which is life and death. They've been captured by the Australian forces. They've had their vision and hearing restricted, as well as their hands restrained. And maybe they're thinking that they will receive the treatment of beheading or violence or whatever that they would do to us. And so these guys are literally pissing and shitting themselves. I don't perceive that that's cowardice. I perceive that they are very courageous to fight us, and I think that it is the mark of a warrior to piss and shit himself and stay on the battlefield. Again, I'm acknowledging their courage in certain circumstances. I'm acknowledging their warrior energy in certain circumstances. I respect some of how and what they do as one soldier to another. When these guys are captured, they're held in the pen, the containment, whatever we call it, and then they were going onto a helicopter to get taken back to the main base at Tarin, where they are managed by our military police, and then they go through this handover to the Afghani judicial system. What had happened on more than one occasion is that the guys in our team would capture a suspected Taliban or a Taliban, right? Whether that person is literally throwing a weapon down and surrendering when we come across them, or they're trying to detonate something and it's not working because of the technology that we have. Some of these guys were caught red-handed, and then they go through this process and we surrender and trust the process. We're not a part of that. We're a part of the capture and the delivery, and that's it. And this is where the biometrics becomes interesting. Some of these guys that were captured and handed over to this judicial system would be back fighting in the same area, fighting us, shooting at us, putting bombs out to try to blow us up weeks later. I think one guy, one Taliban, I think he was caught 3 times, and he'd been through this process 3 times by these same soldiers that were a part of my larger team, a part of the company I was in at Marshall. And this is the complexity of the environment that we're in, where we are trying to support the stabilization of an Afghan political party that was not the Taliban, because the Taliban, I believe, technically were a political movement, even though they had terrorism status or whatever. So we're trying to establish the creation of law and supporting some kind of democratic process and some kind of equality within a system. But for me personally, situations like that, with this same guy getting captured 3 times in the same area, I found that disheartening, because we're not just fighting the Taliban, we're also meeting the consequence of this system that I feel made things harder for us. I want to talk about some special positive cultural experiences I had. And there was certainly a few, and they really stood out. They really stood out. I was with the platoon commander. I was helping my boss, and I was searching the elders as they were coming into a meeting with my boss, and that was a positive experience, like standing on guard for a compound, watching these local men coming in, the men of influence and standing within the community, and doing my best to respectfully greet them, and then also checking that they had weapons or not. And then they would come in and sit around on the floor with my boss and have genuine conversations about how we could support the community. How can we support these men? How can we create safety and trust with them? How can we seem like a better option than the Taliban? There were just such random positive experiences. One experience, like being on patrol through these agricultural orchards and fields and going past an Afghani man or 2 men on a rug, and they just pour a chai tea and offer a tea to me or other soldiers in the team as we're going through. And that's the real human part. That's the humane part of this experience, which really touched me. And it still affects me, as you can hear. Like, there's just humans there. We're humans. The Taliban are humans. The locals are humans. And it was a special thing to be offered tea as we were patrolling through. I remember as well, it could have been near the end of Ramadan. And if you don't know what Ramadan is, I don't fully know what it is. It is an Islamic period of worship or rite of passage, where, from my understanding, and I don't mean to disrespect any Muslims when I communicate this, but I won't do it justice. From my understanding, They choose to abstain from eating. They fast during the daylight hours for the month of Ramadan, and they eat once the sun goes down. I think that's what it is. I'm sorry if I upset a Muslim. I don't mean to, but I'm ignorant of the actual practice. But I perceive it as a very important month of worship and sacrifice for the Islamic people. And I believe it was towards the end of Ramadan, and I was patrolling past a house, and I got my helmet on and my body armor on and my heavy equipment and my rifle, and we're all looking dangerous, and we're moving overtly through the fields and the township. And a man had just been cooking rice. I believe it was to break their fast. I think the sun had just gone down. A man was cooking a big pile of rice for, I think, his family, and I walked past, and he just scooped up the rice in his hand, and he held it for me, he held it up to me, and we've got no common language. He held the rice to me, and then I opened my hand, and he put the rice in my hand, and that rice was just an offering from him to me. And again, it's this experience of, like, we're both men, we're both humans, we're both doing our best here, and he's just offered me rice, and he's not wealthy by any Western standard, and that was a massive invitation to just respecting his humanity and these parts of that culture and that community, and to look away from judgments and to look at it as a whole picture. I also had a similar experience, maybe the same time around Ramadan, where a man picked an apple from his tree and he gave it to me, and this was on a different patrol. It was such a sweet apple, and you can see that, like, I'm weeping now as I talk about this, because I've got no idea how to explain how powerful and symbolic that apple was, or that hand of warm rice. I can't convey that to you. I can't convey that to the soldier that was next to me on that patrol, but that's something that touched me. And I was looking on Google Maps before I came and sat down with this podcast. I reflect for days before I sit here and share, and before I invite you into my heart and I invite you into my experience. And I also want to just hail the listener. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing my story. Thank you for your comment on the post. Thank you for sharing this. It really helps other guys feel seen. It helps me feel seen. It's healing me by being heard in this. When I was looking at the Google Maps, I was looking at some of the photos of these places, and just, there's photos there. There's photos of the street. There's not much information, but the same as other Google Maps, there's random photos there, and it just, there's this part of me that would one day love to return under the banner of peace. And I don't ever know if that's possible, but I wonder how it would be for me to return to these streets where it was so hostile, and I was a young man facing this hostility of war. How would it be to walk those streets in peace? How would it be to maybe have someone recognize me, and maybe they come up to me and they say, hey, you're an asshole, or maybe they come up to me and say, thanks for trying to protect us. I don't know which one it would be. Maybe it would be both. But for me personally, it's very interesting to reflect upon. Wow. I really didn't think I'd go there. I remember the beauty, as well as how some of these young girls would dress, and just the celebration in their clothing, and their clothing was sometimes so vibrant and so beautiful. And it was hard to witness that and understand their development trajectory. Like, at some point in time, that girl, maybe it's pre-pubescent, maybe puberty is when the transition is for her. When she goes from being a girl to a woman, and then she's wearing a blue burqa outside the house for the rest of her life. And I don't understand what that's like for her. I don't understand what that's like for her mum or her auntie. I don't know. But I would just witness that with curiosity and a sense of potential sadness. But that's I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they feel sad about that. I imagine that there has to be certain things they feel sad about. And that is, now I think that they don't have access to education. But at that point in time, when we were there, I was able to witness a bit more cultural freedom and a bit more rights for the women there. And I just really don't know how it is now. But I do believe that within Islamic religion, which is different to the Afghani culture and the Pashtun culture. They're not one and the same. They might meet each other, but it's not the same thing. But I'm of the impression that within the Islamic religion, the covering is viewed with a sense of safety and protection, and it's not viewed as something controlling or punishing. And I'm certainly curious as to hearing more about that. We were on night patrol yeah, we were on night patrol, and I remember we're so connected to our senses. We're hearing everything, we're seeing everything. Our life literally depends on it, so we're very dialed into our senses. And I remember hearing music coming from a compound, and that was a very foreign noise. Like, I had never heard this often. I don't think I've ever heard it at all. But we're on night patrol, so the local population generally don't know where we are. We're the phantoms of the night, and that works in our favor. But we got to hear some kind of party, some kind of celebration, and just listening to that for maybe 20, 30 minutes as we were patrolling around. I'm still looking at the night because of the threat in the night, but then also just with such curiosity. Behind these walls there is some kind of celebration that I'm not privy to, something light and passionate, where there is talent and rejoicing in music in such a desolate place. It really inspired wonder in me just listening to that. And that was the only time I'd heard that. So the transition from these positively cultural experiences and my intrigue and the compassion, I'll go into some things that are less pleasant to maybe hear and less pleasant to discuss. So we were driving in two of these up-armored vehicles in the dashed, and it was in between two main bases, and maybe our two vehicles were kilometers away from any other vehicle, and it was viewed as a low threat maneuver. And this is early on in the piece. I recall this was potentially spring, as from memory there was very small sprouts of green in the dashed, not everywhere, but there was life on this desert floor. Not that there is ever a lot of life, but there was some green there. And the vehicle that I was in, I was up outside the hatch, and we were maybe 30 meters behind the front vehicle. We're following the front vehicle in its tracks. I'm looking for threats out the back. All of a sudden, there is an explosion going off at the front vehicle. It has hit the front vehicle. Boom. Immediately, I look at the front vehicle and I start assessing the situation, and I'm communicating what I am factually observing from that into my team in the vehicle. So there is the factual observation and then my interpretation. The factual observation that I communicated was the front vehicle has just hit an explosive. An explosive is detonated on the back left tire. There appears to be no major damage to the vehicle. My perspective was, I believe the bomb has only partially detonated. In those situations, it's very important that that fact is the ominous communication. If I do have an interpretation or perspective, I communicate that within the context of, this is my perspective. This is my assessment. And then now to share what had actually happened. When I teach people how to start a fire in the bush, there's several steps to starting a fire. And I'm using the fire analogy because I don't feel comfortable to talk about the actual steps that are in the explosive of a crude-made bomb. Maybe, I believe that's already publicly available information, but I don't want to teach everyone listening to this the 5 or 6 steps or whatever there are to making a homemade bomb. I might get myself in trouble for that. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to use the fire analogy. When I start a fire in the bush, I start with tinder, which is usually the fibrous, light stuff. Tinder is what catches the spark. Then I use kindling, which is the fine twigs. I use the fine twigs to transfer the flame from the tinder to the kindling. Then I use pencil size sticks and twigs, then thumb size sticks, then wrist size, then whatever I want. Those steps allow for the transfer from the spark to a solid flame. In the same way that when a bomb that is made, how they were made in Afghanistan, when these bombs detonate, they transfer the energy from the power source to the detonator to the primer. There's other steps, I won't talk about them. What had happened was the vehicle in front of mine had hit a bomb. It triggered the power source to go to the detonator, which blew up the primer, which did not blow up the main charge. It didn't go to the sequence of events to detonate the entirety of the bomb. Oh, that was a massive near miss. So the bomb had failed to completely detonate. It was a partial detonation. And that is one of those moments where it's like, oh, fucking wow. And so the front vehicle is going through its process of casualty assessment, getting out and scanning more mines and checking the integrity of the vehicle whilst we're going through the process of, do we send people out to them? We're doing our security assessment and looking at the situation whilst maybe talking to each other on the radios. And then we record the incident and we drive on. So what we suspect happened was that bomb was out there for quite a period of time, and moisture had gotten into the main charge and made the main charge less susceptible to being initiated in that sequence, and it didn't work. We referred to that as a legacy mine because we don't know how long it's been out there. It might have been there for years, might have been there for months. And so legacy mines were a scary thing because even though we could be cautious and very clever, there was this random X factor of just a bomb that's been there for decades that can go off. And to some degree, that still affects me, right? I remember going on holiday in Cambodia 9 years ago, and I was scared of these mines left over from the Vietnam War or the genocide in Cambodia. I didn't want to even go near the bush. Something that is important for me is to connect with nature when I go to other countries, but in Cambodia and Thailand, I just certainly didn't have any desire because I was still afraid. Yeah, I was still afraid, and maybe I would be if I go to these places that have random mines in the forest. Maybe that fear would still be alive in me. I don't know, but I'm just sharing with you now, like that. It really was there. It affected me for years. And I'm going to move into another incident. Back at the forward operating base at Miraways, that was where we had more of our time, and I felt like we were able to get into a bit of a habit there with patrolling and daily life. Sometimes we would have basically an Afghan National Police ute come to the base with bodies in the back, and those bodies might have just had their throat cut by the Taliban or had been executed or ambushed or whatever. When it was relevant, we would manage the casualties or the body. And I remember one time we had one of these situations, and my friend asked me, he said, "Hey, do you want to come down to the first aid tent and take part in this incident?" And it was a genuine invitation. It wasn't a necessity. I was quite low skilled in that regard compared to other people, so it was a genuine invitation and a way for me to upskill. And I was aware of what things were affecting me, at war. And I asked my friend, I said, "Are the casualties boy or girls?" And he said, they're two girls. And I just said, I don't want to come down for that. I don't. And within myself, I had 3 daughters at home in Australia, and I didn't want to, if I had the option, expose myself to injured or dying young girls. I didn't want to see that, and I didn't want to be a part of that when I had the option. And it's also a very wild conversation to be having as a 23-year-old. Like, maybe other 23-year-olds are saying, "Hey, do you want to come to the movies tonight, or do you want to go to the beach on the weekend?" And so an invitation for us within our peer group was like, "Hey, do you want to come put in razor wire at the back of the base. I need 5 people to help me to protect our position from a ground assault. Or, hey, there's some casualties that have come in the back of a ute. Do you want to come and try to stop these people from dying? Oos. So maybe the time after that, my friend came and asked me, hey, do you want to come? There's 2 casualties come from the Afghan National Police. Do you want to come and help out? And I said, yeah. And I went down and I won't fully unpack this experience. I don't feel to. I'll just go into it. But I was in the first aid tent with maybe 3 or 4 guys, and we had a 12-year-old-ish male casualty, a boy, a human. And then there was potentially his older brother, 18, 23, 35, I don't remember. I think his older brother had been shot in the gut and maybe the leg. And his first aid team was working on him outside. This is in the nighttime, so it's in the dark. They got lights and stuff, but they're working on him outside of our tent, and we're working on the younger guy inside. And so this is going to be quite graphic. Spotify does make chapters, so if you want to skip ahead, go ahead. But the young boy, his brain was outside his head, and it was like, it was the shape of an upside down ice cream cone. And that was way beyond my medical skills. So I was just recording the vital signs that the medic was communicating to me on a board, so the medic could track these measurements in his heart rate and respiratory rate and blood pressure, so he can gauge as to the effect of his first aid treatment. And it was very confusing. And what is common with a head injury or a spinal injury is for a male to have an erection. And so this 13-year-old boy with the brain outside of his head, the grey matter, had his shirt cut open, and he had an erection as well. And I could see that he or someone else was shaving his balls. And a reflection point after that for me was just wondering, like, what is his relationship with sexuality? Is he experiencing consensual sex? Is he groomed into rape? Is he raping other people? As I mentioned in the Afghan Files 2.0 episode, there is more of that sexual, predatorial, pedophilic energy within that area than I've ever been exposed to in my life. So in several regards, that was a confronting scenario. I remember strange smells. I don't recall if the medic was trying to drill through the shin bone of the kid to put in a saline drip or whatever, because his veins had collapsed and he was having difficulty getting saline into the boy's body. It's a bit of a swirl there. I remember like a wave of sludge, kind of grey and maybe some kind of fluorescent colour, green sludge coming out of the kid's ears, and his heart rate dropping a lot. And it was just, yeah, that was intense. That was confusing, and I was right there with that. And to fast forward to how that affected me afterwards, like how that showed up in my life when I returned to Australia, like fucking every time I cooked meat. When I cooked meat and these kind of fats or liquids come out of the meat, or the blood rises in the meat, I would just fucking witness that kid's brain and that sludge coming out of his ears. And I really didn't know what to do with that when it would come up. Like, I didn't know how to say to my missus when I'm cooking meat for my family, like, hey, I'm having really uncomfortable and intrusive and scary memories of this powerlessness that I experienced when there was a teenage boy whose brain was outside of his head, like an upside down ice cream cone, and sludge is coming out of his ears, and there's other blood and things everywhere. And when I cook meat, this is what happens. I didn't want to take up that space. I didn't want to put that shit onto the people around me. I didn't know how to communicate that and to feel emotionally safe. Oh, that was fucking hectic. And that that memory was there for years. That intrusive memory was there for years. And to come back to the incident, to talk back to being in the room with that young boy and his, brother with the gut wound and whatever. The helicopters were soon coming, and we'd done our best to kind of like stabilize these guys. I don't really know what can be done when the brain is outside of the head in that situation, but the helicopter was coming in to get taken to the other base, and we put these casualties, these young men, we put these humans onto a vehicle which gets driven up to where the helicopter lands. Then they go back into the helicopter and they go, and then afterwards, I don't know if we talk about it or whatever, like a debrief. Maybe it's just like, are you good? Yep, I'm good. Even though I'm not good, I'm going to say I'm good because I don't know what else to say. And it could have been the day after that we get an intelligence brief on that, and they say, yep, great work, team. You did a really good job. You stepped up into something that came to us, and you responded well to the situation. Apparently the boy had regained motor skills, so he had then been able to move his hands the day or two after, which I like to believe is the truth, and I'll stay ignorant of that. I'll leave it at that. And then we get told more about what actually happened with where the ambush occurred and what happened. And so basically the Taliban had done that to prove that we couldn't protect the local population. Oh, fuck. And they're right. We couldn't protect the local population all the time. We did what we could, but when we're not there, we can't protect them. And so the Taliban had detonated a bomb on these guys on the motorbike and then shot at them from close range and left their bodies in the street to prove we couldn't protect them. I really don't know what to say with that one, so I'll move on. Towards the end of the tour, there was a voting period, I believe a national voting period, and the team that I was a part of had the responsibility to patrol with the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police out from this forward operating base at Miraways, several kilometers away, northeast, to a local house, a powerful house, a big house, where we would live there for a couple of days to just provide a presence and patrolling, so the Taliban felt less confident to attack people that were voting. And I think they're voting with writing stuff and putting it in a ballot box. That was the general mission. We left the forward operating base, so we walk outside the big gate, like a medieval gate. It opens up, we go, the gate closes behind us. The gate's a powerful, ominous structure, razor wire, towers. Yeah. And we're on the ground with the Australian soldiers. Maybe there was 10 or 12 of us, and maybe there was 20 Afghan National Army. We're supporting them, so we're patrolling at their pace. These guys have been trained pretty well by the Australian soldiers there. They're pretty skilled. They're pretty good at moving on the ground. We're following along with them, but they move quicker than how I would usually choose to patrol. So I'm nearing the edge of what we can physically manage, and then this strange kind of phenomenon occurs as we're going through different suburbs. The local national police start joining onto the back of our patrol. So we've got the Afghan National Army, and then the Australian soldiers, and then random, unknown to me, Afghan National Police. The Afghan National Police were sometimes infiltrated by the Taliban. They were more prone to coercion and threatening because they lived within the local population. So I had a bit of the heebie-jeebies and was certainly looking over my shoulder. These police would kind of come and go as we would leave their jurisdiction, as we'd go past their checkpoints. They'd join us, and then they'd go back to their checkpoint. So at certain points in time, I'd turn around on the patrol. I'd see a guy in a blue uniform with an AK-47, maybe a moustache and a beard. I go, okay, I think he's friendly. And then I'd keep patrolling. I'd turn around, I'd see him leave. We'd keep patrolling. So every 20 steps or so, I'm looking behind me. It's very, very diligent, very skilled. To have that level of awareness does take skill and training and discipline. It's also very important. So we're scanning the whole time. And then I see guys come up in brown uniforms that I've never seen before. This guy looks more like a Taliban. He's walking behind me with an RPG. And I think, what is a fucking policeman doing with a rocket-propelled grenade? But I sit into that and I think, well, he doesn't look physically threatening. His body's not that. And I'm like, I can't ask him. He doesn't speak English. But he's got a brown uniform on, which I've never seen in the police before, and he's walking behind me with a massive rocket. This is the Wild West. And it's a fast-paced patrol, and it just keeps coming like this. There's more police behind me I don't know, and then they go, and like, I'm okay. This is just a part of the journey I'm buckled in for today, and we get out to what's going to be our house for the next 3 days, and we clear it and we secure it. And then we rest and we choose, okay, the team that I was in was 4 guys and we were sleeping in one chamber of the house. And then there was the more of the headquarters of our patrol, which could have been 2 or 3 other guys that were sleeping in the front chamber into this wing of the house. And then there is a main courtyard, which is where we get ready before we go patrol. It is where we eat. And the Afghan National Army that we're with, they go and patrol the area, and they're standing on the roof as well, the same way that someone would stand on a castle with a bow and arrow. We got a couple guys standing on the roof and security at the door, stuff like that. So we're fortifying our position and understanding how to make it strong. The walls in this compound, maybe the internal walls could be 30 centimeters thick. They're made from mud and hay and these kind of things, this more traditional building. And the external walls that are even thicker, and they are often taller. And we would go onto the top of the 1-story building, which had like literal wall around the roof, like a small castle. And we would be looking over that to just make sure that no one would attack us from a close proximity in the day or the night. From that location, we would plan what kind of patrols we would do, what physical presence we wanted to have in the area. And so our team leader was establishing that, as well as having discussions with the Afghan National Army. The first night, and there's little idiosyncrasies there to learn, like the river running around the compound. This is the river that we might wash our hands with. It's 15 centimeters wide. It's a trickle of water. We have a banquet that night with just a lot of rice and like sheep fat, and just eating that with our hands. That was a nice local experience. The host of the house, this has already been organized, so he received us into his home, and there was a beautiful cultural custom referred to as Pashtun Wali. Pashtun Wali means that if someone who is Pashtun invites me into his home, he then takes responsibility to provide for and to protect me. So I'm under his protection. He can't betray me. He can't sell me to the Taliban. I'm under his protection. And I believe it's a deep cultural custom. I believe it's very important. I believe it's connected with honor and his position in the community. That's my understanding of it from being outside that culture. In the night, it was my turn to go on watch. And so I climb up this wooden ladder onto the roof of the building, and I'm walking around, looking out into the darkness and listening. And I'm also on that watch with one Afghan National Army soldier. He speaks no English. I maybe speak 1-2 words of Dari, his language. So he's used to that kind of experience. I'm used to that kind of experience. So we're just there, both looking out. Could have been 2 o'clock at the night, 1 o'clock at the night. I don't remember. I finish my watch duty. I wake up the next Australian. I take him to the same position where he has duty. I go to bed. I take my armor off, I take my helmet off, I put my rifle next to where I sleep. When I say bed, I mean there is a thin mat in the corner of a room where the floor is rubble and the wall is earth. There's 3 other guys in there. I'm tired, so I go back to sleep. I wake up and my body is so tense. We're being shot at. Bullets are coming into the compound. Fuck. The Taliban has breached the compound. It is dark. There is bullets cracking. They're coming into where we are. This is fucking it. We're on the edge of close quarter combat. I'm fucking terrified. I'm laying on the ground. I know what I need to do. We're all starting talking as a team. We're communicating what we can hear. Stay on your guts. Put your gear on. We start putting our gear on. We're getting ready for a close quarter fight, potentially hand-to-hand combat. No one turns their torch on because we don't want to turn our torch on because then that'll get shot at. Laying on my stomach, I'm putting my gear on. I'm putting my armor on. I'm reaching in the dark. I'm putting my rifle onto my chest. I know where everything is because that's the discipline of being a soldier in that environment. Rounds are coming into the first chamber and they're splashing dust onto the team leader, Jason Sten, who's a man I'm friends with today, and I really respect what he's doing. And I have his permission to use his name, but bullets are coming in so close to him that he's getting dust and dirt thrown onto him where he's sleeping. Oof. So we wait. We're ready. We're disciplined. We wait. So Stenny starts talking to us. He's gathering information, what's happening. We're checking in on the team because we can't see properly. Even though we have night vision goggles, we can't see so well. Has anyone been shot? Everyone's good. We stay and we wait. There's a bit of back and forth between the Afghan National Army and with Sten and the interpreter. I don't remember exactly what the communication was then, but I'll share what had actually happened. What had actually happened was the Afghan National Police had approached the hill just outside the compound, this big building that we were living in the courtyard. The Afghan National Police had approached that, and the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police start shooting at each other, and the Afghan National Army then starts shooting in every direction that they wanted to or they felt to. And one of those directions was the rooms we were sleeping in. So the Afghan National Army is saying that it was the Taliban that shot at them, or the police are saying it wasn't the police. They're saying it was the Taliban and whatever. And I don't think we ever got to the bottom of it, but it was this hectic situation where there is something's occurred and we wake up getting shot at, and that fucking affected my central nervous system. Holy fuck. That really affected me, getting shot at so loudly. And the only logical conclusion in my mind of that being possible was that the Taliban had breached the compound and that we've got hand-to-hand contact imminent, and that was a plausible understanding, and that tension and that stress was like stitched into my body, waking up to that violent and confronting invitation, and then to have to meet that with such a level of forward momentum and also control and discipline that really affected me. And that showed up in my life sometimes as well, when I would get woken up. I got woken up by my kids sometimes. And the energy of that experience was what I met my kids with, and that's not fair on them, but that was part of the war spilling over. And I remember waking up at my house and hearing a noise outside, and then kind of having this out-of-body experience, being 5 meters ahead of where I was. So I don't fully understand it, but I know that it severely affected me in a central nervous system, like in a core kind of way. Oof. But ultimately, in that environment, in that compound, we just kind of brush it off. It's a part of the show. It's a part of the conflict that we're in, and we just acknowledge it and brush it off, continue on that mission, on that task. And so we had the 3 or 4 days there, and the voting finished. I don't remember so much. I think that was kind of it, but we did a couple of patrols, and we were then patrolling back to our base, and a super random thing happened. Like, one of these armoured vehicles that we were patrolling in proximity with, because we met up with other Australian forces, one of these armoured vehicles, a donkey walked into the armored vehicle and its head got wrapped around the tire and it got crushed. And then there's this strange kind of kerfuffle and argument over the incident, who has responsibility for it, and some local Afghani guys wanting compensation for his donkey being killed and whatever. And like, there's just things that I just don't understand. It was just a part of it. And so we patrol back to our base. Yeah, I want to acknowledge Jason Sten for that as well. I had a short conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, bringing up this incident, and I just had the respect for him as a leader, as just being a humble, skilled, grounded guy, but also the energy. Like, I just don't want to fuck with him. But I respect the responsibility of all the leaders that we had there. It's a lot to shoulder, whether someone was, a great, exceptional leader, or maybe they were underperforming in comparison to some of the other guys. It's just a lot to carry. It's a lot to carry. So I salute those guys. I take my hat off to them. Also the guys that were on the ground, just with individual leadership, just being who we were. And I'm going to step into the last incident of this podcast. It was towards the end of the trip, quite towards the end of the trip. And at that point in time, we were sharing our small forward operating base, Mirrorways, with an American platoon plus, a big platoon. And they had a couple of vehicles there. Some vehicles with some big cannons on the top. Something that we would do sometimes with these soldiers is we might trade things. We might trade our equipment. So I traded my belt rig, my webbing, for carrying the I'll call it a machine gun. We don't use that terminology particularly for this weapon, but for carrying an automatic weapon, a light support weapon, a machine gun is adequate. I traded that with an American soldier because he was having a machine gun, and I traded that for his shirt and his pants. That soldier's name was Cody Board. So he had my belt rig, the webbing to carry specifically for the belts, the link of ammunition, which goes for a machine gunner, and it's set up for that. And so he was wearing that. And there was a patrol with an Australian team and an American team a couple kilometers away from the base. I wasn't on the patrol. I was on the radio or something back at the base, so having a rest. And this is an experience my friend shared with me. So an explosion had occurred, and there was a casualty. There was a killed in action. The Australian team, it was an American that was killed in action. The Australian team had come over to provide support, maybe manage the helicopter extraction of the deceased, the man. And the passage of information, like I said, it's on a need-to-know basis. So the Australian team was aware there is a friendly KIA, and there's a helicopter inbound, and they're aware of what's going to happen. We're going to secure the helicopter's location, and we're going to transport the KIA equipment and escort, protecting the body of the KIA to the helicopter. And a really good friend of mine goes to pick up the webbing of the KIA, the equipment of the killed in action, and he sees my name on the equipment belt of the soldier. And he didn't tell me this till years after. So he sat with this for a while, and some of us are really slow to kind of integrate or digest or understand how to talk about these things. And so my friend told me this years after Afghanistan. He said, I thought you were dead. I saw your name on the equipment for the KIA, and I just thought that you were dead. And I can't ask someone, is Lex dead? Is Reilly dead? Because that's not a part of the passage of information. That's not a part of what needs to occur in that moment. So he carried the equipment to the helicopter or to wherever he needed to carry it, and he just thought, fuck, Lex is dead. And it wasn't until later on that it was clarified that it was Cody Board, an American soldier that was killed, that he realized that it wasn't me that was killed. Oh, fuck. I think that for me, there's just been so many emotions to war that I haven't wanted to open up. And so this really has been an opening up of Pandora's box. And there is an interlacing of different stories. And it really affected me when I heard that Cody Board died. And I knew that I had traded with him this his uniform, and also it was scary that this guy that is one of the kind of 60 men that we live with, yep, poof, gone, he's dead. And that was a couple of weeks before we were leaving Afghanistan. And it was a 5-day turnaround from being in a combat zone to being at home in the lounge room with my family, with my wife at the time, the mother of my children and my children. That was 5 days. And I remember flying on the helicopter out from the base and just still having the sense like it's not over till I'm over. It's possible for helicopters to get shot at. It's not over till I'm out. Oh, fuck. So I had this naive expectation that coming back to Australia would be utopic and that I would feel a massive sense of relief. The truth was I was so tense. I didn't sleep the first night I was home. I felt empty. I felt lonely, and I couldn't manage with what I'd experienced. And all of this stuff that you've heard in Afghan Files 1, 2, and 3, and there's more, you know. I was involved in 2 battles. I was involved in sniper missions. There is at least an Afghan 4.0, but I'm going to change the direction I'm going in with this podcast. If I do a 4.0, it's not going to be now, it's going to be later on. But there was just so much inside of me with tension and fear and anxiety and stress and aggression. And I started putting that onto my family. I wasn't equipped to manage myself, and my family wasn't equipped to receive me how I came. It's no one's fault. It was what it was, but it was a tough thing for us all to go through. And when any soldier goes away, he and she come back and they bring with them that experience. And so these 3 podcasts have been the most I've ever spoken about, like in length, in detail about Afghanistan. And it's really taken 15 years for me to be able to articulate this and to feel comfortable to talk about these things and to feel them as I talk about them, and to not need to put on a mask of bravado or heroism. But then I can acknowledge the bravado and heroism when it's there. But I can also sit into the vulnerability and the fear that I had and the human element that touched in me. But it really affected me. And that triggered a massive war within myself. And that really got slammed like a wrecking ball into my immediate family and then my wider family. Oh. One thing that Afghanistan guaranteed for me was that these childhood fears and beliefs and traumas were put into a pressure cooker, and also inhibited me from being able to digest some of my emotions and to unpack some of my experiences. And really, Afghanistan for me was the start of the dark night of the soul, whether it was like the first day for me coming back or whatever, I don't know, but it was the start of a very long, dark, hard and lonely and destructive and painful chapter in life for me. And sitting into who I am, I invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. Please share or comment if this has invited you into reflection or thought, because this does help other people hear it. There are certainly veterans who don't talk about or go near this stuff, and there's certainly people in daily life who have their own traumas that they don't talk about or go near because of a fear of what it might bring up. What I feel now is that in my next episode, I want to unpack and share with you potentially these childhood traumas for me, these really formative experiences in my youth that impacted my psyche and my sense of well-being in the world. Thank you for hearing my story. I want to acknowledge Cody Board for his sacrifice. I want to acknowledge you for listening. And I want to acknowledge myself for being able to explore who I am, to sit into this and to open this up so vulnerably and honestly for others to hear. That's it from me. Back to you in the studio.